Welcome to this special edition of Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. This is a candidate forum for Legislative District 8 in the Unicameral. I'm Jerry Simon, a League member and moderator for the forum. The League of Women Voters never supports or opposes political parties or candidates. We present this forum solely for voter education. Here's the format for our forum. Each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement. We'll follow that with questions and answers. The questions were prepared by the League of Women Voters. Each candidate will have up to 90 seconds for their answer, and each candidate will also answer the same question. A timekeeper will alert the candidates when they have 30 seconds of time remaining and when to stop speaking. And we'll close out the forum with a 1-minute closing statement by each candidate. Before the forum, the candidates drew lots to determine their initial speaking order, which we will alternate throughout the forum. And I will introduce you to them in that order now. They are Mina Davis, Josh Henningsen, and Megan Hunt. And we'll start with the opening statements with Mina Davis.
Hi everybody, my name is Mina Davis. I am 25 years old, a data scientist, and I also work at Target at the weekends. The reason I emphasize these experiences are for a few key things. First, when I've been going door to door, the one thing I've noticed since 2014 and beyond is that we have seen a great lack of engagement. People want to feel connected, they want real experiences. Not everyone has a Cinderella story, and we just need to be honest. By doing that, we engage and empower people to take back control. And by doing so, elevating ordinary concerns, I've been able to speak to others about lots of things concerning people in the district, and hopefully I'll be able to talk and clarify some things today.
Thank you. Josh Henningsen.
My name is Josh Henningsen, and until I decided to run for legislature last summer, I worked for the legislature, first as legal counsel for the Judiciary Committee, and then the Health and Human Services Committee, and then as an Inspector General for Nebraska Child Welfare. And I decided to run because I was able to watch the unicameral at its best and at its worst. At its best, people were able to work together across party lines and across the state to get things done and solve really challenging problems facing our state. And at its worst, what we've seen more recently, I think, is in party politics and political games that have sort of infected the body. And I'm running for legislature to try to push back on some of that partisanship and get back to a position where we can solve the issues facing our state and work together to get things done.
Thank you. And Megan Hunt.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum today. My name is Megan Hunt, and District 8 is my home. I've lived here and I've been a business owner here for 13 years, and I'm running because I really want to see Nebraska as a place where everybody feels like they can put down roots, start a family, go through our wonderful education system, and have a great job. I think that we really need more champions for the middle and working class in the Nebraska legislature, and in District 8, I am that candidate. From organizing support and testimony for issues like Medicaid expansion, paid family leave, and quality public education, to my work with the nonprofit community here in Omaha, to bringing in millions of dollars of revenue into this state as a small business, I have the track record and the passion and the experience to give Nebraskans what they need now. As an entrepreneur, as a mother, and as an activist, I have always showed up for the people in my community, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to earn the support of my neighbors and do that for everybody here in our great state.
Thank you. We'll go to our first question, and we'll start with Josh on this one. No legislation for property tax reform was passed in the unicameral this session. Is property tax, the level of the property tax, an issue, and what should be done about Nebraska's property taxes?
Sure. Well, property taxes are a difficult problem to solve because it's a different problem in the urban areas and the rural areas. Certainly in my background working for Center for Rural Affairs and doing research on how those taxes have grown over the past 10 years in rural areas, it certainly is a problem there. We all agree it's a problem. The issue is what the solution is and how that works together for the urban areas and the rural areas. I think it is possible, but there has to be a level of trust between the urban areas and the rural areas, because everyone's going to have to give a little, everyone's going to have to get a little to make that a feasible solution. And I think ultimately that's where the work is going to come in. I do think it's possible. I think it is an issue, but it's something that it's going to take a lot of work to do to get there.
Okay, thank you. Megan.
That's a great question, and I think it deserves a really careful look at the research and evidence. And as a leader in business, I've always really tried to make the best decisions possible with the best information available to me. And that's why I work hard to collaborate with experts and people who know about this stuff to find the best possible solutions for tough problems like property taxes. I can tell you that the goal I'm going to have in the legislature is to make sure that we can keep property taxes low without hurting funding for our public schools. And that's why in the legislature, I want to take responsibility for looking at how we can stop passing all of the burden of funding our public schools onto the middle class and the working class, because everyday people cannot afford to keep paying more in taxes and getting less in services. Nebraska ranks near the bottom in our nation in state funding for public schools. We're actually 49th in the percentage of state revenue supporting public schools. And state aid to schools is not keeping pace with school expenses. And that's the kind of stuff that leads to things like property tax increases. It also leads to program cuts, to bigger class sizes, and lots of really bad outcomes for students, and obviously really bad outcomes for taxpayers. So it's important for me that voters know that the most important thing to me is to reduce taxes on the middle and working class without hurting our children and our public schools in Nebraska.
Thank you. And Mina?
Yes, so actually, as a member of the working class, I'd like to say that there have been a few key conversations that I've been having at the doors. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you're 25. What do you know about property tax? And I say, actually, quite a bit, because there are 3 areas when we talk about how this affects an urban district. I think one of the things and one of the ways I've been approaching such a solution is equitable property tax reform and being forthcoming about it. So most recently, I testified on a bill on behalf of Senator Henningsen, which would actually put up to $500 of a refundable tax credit for renters. That's a class of people where we have a lot of renting properties in LD8, and we need to address that. We also need to talk about how this affects homeowners. I have surveys that I've received back, and I actually got one back today where that was the #1 issue. Last, we have to talk about commercial properties. One of the things that we have to be very honest and forthcoming about is that we're not able to expand our tax base. So yes, it affects areas like public education, but it also affects other areas in which we see a lot of harm coming to those who are of the lower middle income working class, and I think it's definitely something that we have to be prepared to answer. I'm very afraid of what's coming with the ballot initiative, and that's something that I wish we actually address the issue head on instead of playing political games.
Thank you. Here's our next question. Some have said the unicameral has become more partisan in the last 2 sessions. Do you agree? How do you work in a bipartisan way, and how will you ensure that the unicameral remains a nonpartisan legislature? And we'll start with Megan.
I love this question, and I'm so happy you asked this question because I've knocked over 12,000 doors in our district. We have a great group of volunteers, and as someone who's lived here for a long time, I feel like I really have my finger on the pulse of what people are thinking here in our district and what's bothering them. And the #1 thing, and this actually really surprised me, that I hear at the doors is that people really want to see an end to the partisan rhetoric, to the bickering, to the extreme, really pitting people against each other. And that's something that has absolutely gotten a lot worse in our nonpartisan unicameral in the last couple years. One thing that I'm really proud of is my experience in building teams. And when you're building a team to accomplish a goal, whether that's things I've done in the nonprofit community to raise money for organizations like the ACLU, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, whether that's building a team to do something in business. I run a company, we have 9 employees, and I'm proud of the work that we do together as a business to support our community. But when you're getting people together with varying opinions and varying experiences, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to compromise and collaborate and listen. And I'm really proud of my record of doing that and the experiences that I've built as a person who is very strong in my beliefs. But when I have better information, I do better things with it. And I'm a person who loves to learn, who loves to do better. And as a state senator, I promise that that's what I'll do for you.
Thank you. Mina?
Yeah, so as a community organizer, that's actually where I got my start. One of the things that I've been, you have to work with people of diverse perspectives. You have to reach across the aisle. I mean, that's, a common phrase we hear nowadays. I've actually had people tell me, they want unity. One of the things that I've done, because I did grow up in West Omaha and Millard, and I can tell you, some of my best friends are Republicans, and I've learned to, work together. I've actually had people who challenged me on some of my ideas, such as fair scheduling people people who said, this doesn't sound like something that I would like as a conservative. But I said, we have some common values. We just have a different way and perspective of how we might want the government to be involved. And I've also built relationships with several of the other candidates running who are definitely, more to the right of me. And I think that's what is key, is relationship building. As a unicameral, as I've seen with the end to the session, it really disappointed me because we lost a lot in terms of progress, in terms of making the state move forward just because of political games.
Thank you. Josh.
Thank you. I do agree that the legislature has gotten less nonpartisan over the last few sessions. I was there. I watched it happen up close. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about the nonpartisan legislature, one of the things, one of the misunderstandings, I think, or one of the misperceptions is that people aren't walking in to the body with party affiliations or perspectives or viewpoints or ideologies, and that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is, to be a nonpartisan legislature, to really get the best out of that, you need to be approaching the problems in good faith, working together to try to solve the problem, not to score a political victory. And I think to do that, it means rebuilding the center, identifying that middle third group of senators that came to Lincoln to do the job, to do what's best for the state, regardless of how it might affect you politically or how it might affect them politically or how it might affect the governor politically. That approaching those problems in good faith really is ultimately what you need to do and how we get back to the best traditions of our nonpartisan legislature.
Thank you. Here's our next question. The way a juvenile justice system is funded influences outcomes for youth and communities. If elected, where would you prioritize dollars spent in our juvenile justice system? What programs and services do you believe are most important to fully fund, and why? And we'll start with Mina.
Yep, so a couple of key things. One of the areas that I discussed, at least from the perspective of my community, is really talking about criminal justice reform and progressive criminal justice reform. For juveniles, I think one of the things that we really need to work on are more rehabilitative programs, making sure that we have the systems in place. So one of the things I've talked about is it's not just, we shouldn't be talking about what happens when they get to the detention center, but what happens before then. So we talk about issues like the school to prison pipeline and the fact that people of color, those kids, are more oftentimes due to in-school suspensions to have a higher propensity of ending up in that place. So by addressing those problems and also making sure that we have greater discussions about how do we intercede before it becomes a greater issue, I think that's where I would love to focus because it is clearly a great problem and we just need to be upfront about it.
Thank you. Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, juvenile justice is an issue that I have worked on quite a bit actually in the legislature, and we've done a lot in the last few years. We've made a lot of progress in moving towards community-based services and trying to limit as much as possible how deep into the system kids are getting. And I think to continue that process, one of the things we need to focus on is investing more in creating those community-based resources and community-based services, which means sort of by definition that we're going to be investing more resources at the county level. For too many kids, once they're in the system, it's sort of a downhill slide. There's sort of a gravitational pull towards deeper and deeper into the system. And so the more that we can do to fund those community-based resources, keep kids in the home, and do as much as we can to keep them out of the system and keep them in the shallow end as much as we can, which means investing at the local level. And that's something that we really need to make a lot of progress in and provide alternatives to detention, alternatives to out-of-home placement, and do those sorts of things to really do what's best for the kids without dragging them deeper and deeper into the system.
Thank you. Megan.
These are some great points made, about the school to prison pipeline, about the importance of investing in programs to prevent recidivism. I would completely echo those points. What I know and what I think we know is that schools and communities need to be addressing the whole child, from a physical and an educational and developmental and a mental health point of view, because this is what gives them a foundation for a successful and productive life. And we also know that prevention is more inexpensive than the consequences of leaving these issues unresolved. And so it's really important that mental health care, that all of these services are available to everybody who needs it, especially when they're young and they're in school, because that's going to prevent a lot of these problems. The trouble, of course, is money. How do we pay for these programs? We have to hire qualified practitioners who can do assessments and rehab and referrals, but how do we pay for that? And how do we have, make sure that we have the workforce in Nebraska that we need to fulfill these jobs and make sure these kids are getting the support they need? I really think that this issue doesn't just belong to the justice system. You know, it has to do with the foundations that we have with our families and in our community. And whether children are in the system, they're getting out of the system, they're in this pipeline, they're going down the wrong road. We really need to be investing in our schools and in our community programs to make sure that the quality of life that families are able to experience to provide for their kids is there to make sure that you know, kids that are in danger are getting the help they need to stay out of the system.
Thank you. And our next question, how should we address the unmet health care needs of Nebraskans? Do you support expanding Medicaid? And we'll begin with Josh.
I do support expanding Medicaid. I actually worked on a bill to expand Medicaid here in Nebraska when I was legal counsel for the Health and Human Services Committee. And when you do the research and you talk to stakeholders on that issue, it's possible. And it's possible to do it without spending any more general fund dollars. And that would help us close that gap for about 90,000 Nebraskans. But for a lot of other people are also at risk of not having sufficient health care throughout the state. And there are different challenges, particularly in rural areas, to finding ways to expand access and in making sure that we have enough healthcare practitioners and trying to be innovative as much as we can to use things like telemedicine and other approaches to make sure that even if they can, whether they can afford it or not, that there's actually providers to provide the service. And so we definitely should expand Medicaid. It would save the state money in a lot of different areas, and we could do it in a budget neutral way. So yes, I would support that.
Okay, thank you. Megan.
That's exactly right. As an uninsured person who's in the Medicaid gap, I really understand firsthand what a burden it is to choose between prescription medications that you need and food for the week for your family. I understand the anxiety of putting off appointments or doctor's visits or caring for a child or an elderly relative because there just isn't enough money to go around. I also know from speaking to thousands of voters in our district that everyone from the children to young professionals to the elderly are really struggling to receive access to health care, and that expanding Medicaid in Nebraska is going to be an important first step. It's going to be a really important tool in our toolbox to make sure that we have healthy families and a productive workforce here in our state. I have a lot of experience organizing support and testimony in the Nebraska legislature on issues like Medicaid expansion, access to health care services. I was a huge advocate for Title X funding for women's health care, which I take advantage of myself, and also funding for clinics in Western Nebraska because it's so important that those in our rural communities get the same high quality health care that those of us in the urban centers are able to access if we can afford it. I'm very proud of my long record of supporting access to health care and the activism and work that I've done before I was even running for office. This is just something that I really care about. It's inside me and my bones, and no matter what happens, you know, that's something that I'm going to keep working on through support for organizations that are doing that hard work to make this happen. And I really look forward to going Lincoln to do this for everybody in our state.
Thank you. Mina.
Yes, I'm also in the uninsured gap. There's also a group of people, the self-employed, that's a huge problem for, because one of my concerns, you know, yes, I'm clearly in favor of expanding Medicaid, and in fact, I think Nebraska can go even further and have greater discussions of utilizing the Affordable Care Act under a particular section that allows states to create systems such as the single-payer system. My focus is right now is expanding Medicaid because, yes, I too face decisions whether I can afford like a certain medication. For example, when I had a sinus infection, let me tell you, I had to put it off, and it was extremely stressful, and thankfully, I got to One World to be able to actually have those, you know, that healthcare that I needed. But it was, you know, for someone who was salaried, for someone who had insurance, and even then I couldn't afford my copay. That's a major problem. So, you know, I'm working hard with folks, educating people on the ground, and that's something I did back when, you know, our favorite Obamacare was actually on its way to being passed. I was part of those organizing efforts and making sure people understood. If Nebraska doesn't hurry up and expand Medicaid, we do have a chance of losing out on federal dollars, which makes it even worse for those who really do need that aid. So yes, expanding Medicaid is a goal, but hopefully we can go further because it shouldn't stop there.
Okay, thank you. And we think we have time for one last question if we ask you to just take 1 minute instead of 90 seconds for this answer. Does Nebraska adequately fund public education at the state level, and how would you approach funding? And we'll start with Megan.
No. That's the easy answer, but obviously how we're going to approach that funding is a really hard answer. I mentioned earlier, Nebraska really ranks by the bottom of the nation in the school funding that we give as a state to our public schools. We're 49th. I think that's absolutely a shame. And when we look at that, what that practically means is that the burden of funding our public schools is put on the middle class, on the working class, on rural communities that don't really have as much revenue in property taxes. We've got to take a look at that. We need to have a sober, honest conversation about what we can give as a state, where we can, make room in the budget for that. And I'm really ready to take on the hard work of doing that.
Okay, thank you. Mina.
You see my shirt, no, or maybe you don't. It says I love public schools, and my dog has a matching one, by the way, color blue. And the reason no, we don't. They won't even look at the TIOSA formula, which is a state aid formula. And I think that's a disgrace because, what we're facing right now is where districts are passing levy overrides because that's their only way of raising revenue. When it gets to that crisis point, we have to ask ourselves, how much further are we going to make taxpayers stretch that dollar? I am in full support of finding a solution and making it come to fruition so that we can actually adequately fund our schools and make sure that we don't fall into the same situations that we're seeing teachers in Oklahoma, Arizona, and possibly Colorado, and even West Virginia. I do not want to get to that level, and we should not definitely replicate those situations.
Okay, and Josh.
The answer is no, we don't. And this is part of a bigger issue, I think, that happens in the legislature where the body pretends to cut state expenditures so that they can brag about how, controlling the growth of state government and balancing the budget and all those sorts of things. But what they really do is just pass those costs onto counties, school districts, tuition payers at the university. They don't make the cost go away, they just make someone else pay it. And so what we really need to do is to have an honest conversation with voters and our constituents and say, this is what schools cost, this is what universities cost, this is what the services that you require, that you demand cost. And if we're not willing to have that honest conversation and we're not willing to tell the truth to our constituents, then we're never going to get anywhere on solving these issues.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our question portion of the forum, and we're going to go to our closing statements, starting with Mina Davis.
All right, my name once again is Mina Davis, and it was a pleasure to be able to speak on some issues today that I've heard, many voters. And one of the reasons I'm running is, for me, I do not see an authentic working class voice in the legislature right now. And I decided, as a community organizer, as an everyday person, I said, I do know some things about these issues. I do know what it's like to collaborate and work together. And for me, what we really need to do is to continue to engage, empower, and elevate everyday concerns. Otherwise, we will never move forward as a state. And if you choose to elect me, one of the things I can definitely promise is to make sure I listen and work together within the community to find better solutions.
Okay, thank you. Josh Henningsen.
Thank you. And thank you, Jerry, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this forum together today. The job of a state legislator is a hard one. There's long hours, it's a lot of work, and the tough part is not floor speeches, it's not pushing the red or green button at the end of the day, it's that work in between, building relationships, building a consensus, building coalitions. I have the experience to do that. I have a track record of doing that, to get things done in the legislature. And I think that what we're really, all of us are here doing today is asking the voters of District 8 to hire us to do that job. And I think that with that experience, I can go to Lincoln and be an effective representative from day one. And I appreciate the opportunity here to talk about some of these issues. If you want to learn more, you can go to joshhenningsen.com. I have my phone number and my email. I'd be happy to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Megan Hunt.
In the past decade of working and living in this district, I've seen a lot of fighters come and go. And when folks are already working 2 jobs, when they're taking care of kids, when they're paying more in taxes and getting less in services, it is really hard to sustain the level of civic engagement that we need to move the needle and get some real change. That's why we need fighters in all levels of government in Nebraska and policymaking who are hearing and really responding to the needs of their constituents and their people in their community. In my community, I'm one of those fighters, and I'm in it for the long haul. This is where I live, this is where I've put down roots, and these are the people I care about, and I've always been fighting for us, and I'm really looking forward to bringing my passion, my experience, and my grit to the legislature to grow access and opportunity for everybody who wants to put down roots here and call Nebraska home. For everybody who's been waiting for somebody in this great state to stand up with them and fight for them. I'm Megan Hunt, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to earn your vote.
Thank you. The League would like to thank all of our candidates for being here for this forum for Legislative District 8 in the unicameral, and we remind you that 2 of these candidates will advance to the election in November. The League also is doing a lot of other forums. We'll be doing several other legislative districts. We'll be doing Omaha Public Schools. We've done the Republican primary for Douglas County Assessor Register of Deeds. OPPD Subdistrict 1 will be another forum that we will do. And then we have our voter's guide, which is available online. If you go to omahallwv.org, the voter's guide is available there online. We will have hard copy, printed copies available at every Omaha Public Library location and also at the Douglas County Election Commissioner's office. And those should be coming and available soon. The League also would like to remind you that you can use also another online resource, which is vote411.org, and you can compare candidates and see there are a few more questions answered by the candidates than in the printed voter's guide. So all these 3 resources are really companion pieces for you to be able to judge and make a decision on the May 15th ballot. So for the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha, I'm Jerry Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the candidates and the issues, and on the May 15th primary, go vote, Omaha.